As I announced earlier, our speaker this morning is Jason Odner. Jason is a Quaker, a member of the Society of Friends, a community activist, a registered nurse, and co-founder and current vice president of the Phoenix Alliance for Community Health. The title of his sermon is Breaking Rules, a Study in Fierce Compassion. Please join me in welcoming Jason.
Good morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. I think, as a nurse, one thing that nursing school didn't prepare me for was how every single day I'm faced with complex situations that are morally ambiguous, ethically complicated. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about rules because real life is messy. In 2010, almost exactly 3 years ago, a lot of us, many of us in this room, marched together the day that SB 1070 took effect. And we took to the streets, and we chanted, "We will not comply." About 130 people were arrested that day, including, 60 Unitarians, I think. It was an inspirational day, an amazing day. When the Kansas State Legislature was trying to pass a copycat bill of SB 1070, one of the legislators who was very much in favor of passing a copycat law revoked his support, saying that he didn't want to deal with the drama like they saw in Arizona. Now, I would love to see him say that he didn't want to pass it because it's simply wrong to pass racist or oppressive bills, but if being scared of drama is the best we can get, I'll take it. But it leaves me with a question 3 years later, looking back. Two questions, really. Number one, when we took that defiant stance together that day, what exactly was it that we were promising not to comply with? Something so simple as an order to disperse? Was it just Section 2B of SB 1070? Or was it something bigger that we were trying to resist together? Was it a bigger journey than that? And my other question is, what are the ethics of noncompliance? Do we spend enough time really exploring where to break rules, how to break rules? And this is a complex question because when we break rules together, we all value transparency. We value honesty. And we want to build a society that's transparent and honest and that has a clear social contract. And we have to balance that against the imperative to stand up for our neighbors and to act in love and to protect people even when the systems that we exist within don't want them to be protected. And so that's what I want to explore today. But before we proceed any further, I just want to take a moment to meditate together in silence and hold in our hearts all those people who are not being protected by the rules. The people in immigration detention, the people who, as we speak, are lost in our southern deserts. Some of them lost, some of them thirsty, some of them dying. If we could just take a moment to hold them in our hearts and to think about them. Thank you. I remember when I was young, I did not grow up a Quaker. I grew up in another church that, though loving and supportive and good people, was quite a bit more formalized than Unitarian Universalism or Quakerism is. And it was a church that had a lot of respect for rules. And I will always remember a certain Sunday school lesson that left me confused and exploring. And it talked about the story where Jesus is preaching in a house in Capernaum. And there's a lot of people who want to hear what he has to say. And so they crowd into the house, and they push, and they shove, and cram in. And they gathered around the house. I imagine being times that I've been at the front of a good concert. You know, you got there early, you're not moving to get out. And there's 4 men, and they have a patient. The Bible uses the word friend, the New King James Version, but whatever else he was the patient. He was paralyzed, and he'd been paralyzed for a long time, if you look at the way that the original language is written. And a paralyzed person doesn't live a long time unless someone's taking care of them. They develop bed sores, which get infected, they get contracted, they develop all kinds of complications unless somebody has been very diligent about making sure they're kept safe. So whatever else he was their patient. And they believed that if they could get him to Jesus, he would be healed. Now, the Bible doesn't say how long they carried him. I know that when we're working in remote locations in Guatemala, people find out that there's going to be medical people around, and they'll put the baby in a canoe and row upstream for 2 days and walk for 4 days through the selvage, hoping to catch up with us. But I don't know. But what we know is that according to this story, they walked around the house several times, and they pushed and they shoved, trying to get into the crowd, and they could not get the patient care. And so at this point, the standard of care has been met, right? Like, as a nurse, I feel like they tried, they can sort of sign off, they can document, we tried to get him healed. I'm covered. But what they did is they went on the roof of the house, and they busted through the roof of the house, not their house, mind you. And they lowered the patient through the roof of the house to get him care. This is an amazing story. And according to the Bible, Jesus said, you know, your sins are forgiven, and he heals them. And every sermon that you find online, if you look this up, that explores this, always says, well, why did Jesus say your sins are forgiven? Did they believe he was paralyzed because he had sinned? And I'm thinking, these people aren't even envisioning this scenario. These people got here early, they're pushing, they're shoving, they're at the front of the thing, they are interested in the sermon, they want to hear what's being said, and all of a sudden, some jerks are busting through the roof of someone else's house. There's chunks of clay and palm fronds falling on your head. They're lowering some dude through the roof. The crowd was not pleased, I assure you. These are the same people who didn't get out of the way when they were trying to get him in the first time, right? And I imagine Jesus up on the, standing on the table back in the corner saying, whoa, 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 it's cool, they're with the band. It's all right. It's forgiven. I don't know much about Jesus. I don't know if he could heal paralytics. What I want to know is, who were these 4 guys? What's their story? That story's not told. But whoever they were, these were people who were ready to break rules. And this registered with me from a very young age. I remember very clearly being 8 years old in Sunday school and realizing that this was a radical story at a time when I had not been exposed to radical ideas. And feeling like the Sunday school teacher and the other people talking about it didn't seem to be getting its implications. I was young. I was taught to follow rules. I was taught to respect property. And here were these men busting through someone else's roof. So I want to talk about situations where love calls on us to break through roofs. You know, there's different ways of framing this, different ways of looking at breaking rules for love, what we'll call conscientious resistance. We talk a lot about civil disobedience. That's the most sort of visible way of presenting it. With conscientious, we're talking about civil disobedience, and civil disobedience is very visible, right? And people who rely on civil disobedience, they believe that in those contexts, things need to happen in the most visible way possible. And for a lot of applications, this is the right way to do it. With civil disobedience, it works in situations where the act of getting caught and the act of facing the consequences is the vehicle through which we create social change. Young men, black men in the South sit down at a lunch counter. They're beaten, They're dragged away. The entire world sees these images of young men sitting peacefully and being beaten. And people start to wake up and question the ethics of the situation. It wouldn't work if they didn't do it, if they didn't get caught. It wouldn't work if they weren't beaten. They actually, in their own way, conscript their oppressors into participating in the social change movement by making the oppression visible and visceral in a way that everyone understands. They're breaking rules. They're getting things done. But there's other ways that I look at. I look at these four men who lowered their friend through the roof. I don't know that they understood what they were doing in the context of civil disobedience. They were just trying to get their friend care, and they perceived a duty, and they were going to get that job done no matter what it took. They'd made a promise, and they were going to keep it. And whenever I think about the Bible, I always like to think, I think it's important that we remember this in the social and historical and political context. Everybody knew that they were living under colonial oppression. Right? The Romans owned the place. These people were subject to the rule of an oppressive government. Everyone knew that people were watching Jesus very closely, and that breaking rules in that environment, in proximity to this rabble-rousing, troublemaking, anti-colonialist activist named Jesus, was guaranteed to be caught. And yet they followed through anyway. So there's other ways of understanding sort of conscientious resistance other than just civil disobedience. My first experience with breaking rules was really with No More Deaths. And No More Deaths is an organization that works on the US-Mexico border to try to reduce the number of fatalities in that region. Every year, about 400 people die on the US-Mexico border trying to cross. It's as many as would fit on a large commercial airliner. And No More Deaths does not perceive their effort to aid these people, food, water, medical attention, basic orientation with regard to date and direction. They understand this as being civil initiative. They don't believe that they're breaking rules. Civil disobedience recognizes that rule exists. There's a rule against sitting at the lunch counter. We're going to sit down anyway. We're going to challenge the rule. In civil initiative is an idea that was sort of formulated in the 1980s in the sanctuary movement among people, mostly in Tucson, who were trying to find creative ways to protect first asylum refugees from Guatemala, from other parts of Central America during the genocides that were taking place at that time. Civil initiative, in contrast to civil disobedience, is framed as a way of upholding rules when the government itself is breaking them and when the dominant systems are breaking them. They believe that humanitarian aid is never a crime, cannot be a crime, and cannot be against the rules. They recognize that they may be arrested for it, but that doesn't make it against the rules. And so they're placed in this situation where they have to balance the duty of transparency against the duty to help those in need. Here's a situation where there's actual work to get done, and being too visible about it would not actually assist them in doing it. So in 2005, when I first came to No More Deaths, the policy was this. If they encountered somebody who was having a medical emergency, they would evacuate them to a hospital. And every month, they would file a report with the Border Patrol saying, so you know, these are our protocols. We believe that everyone has a right to care. And we, this month, evacuated 5 males and 3 females who had these medical conditions. And no, you may not have their names. And so this was their effort to strive to balance accountability and transparency against the need to take care of people. But there's a third set of circumstances where transparency gets even more fuzzy. I look at the case of, for example, the Underground Railroad, right? It's easy to say that we have a duty to transparency. That's the least, the civil disobedience is the least morally complex, because we can say, we broke the rules visibly, we told everyone we're going to break the rules, but, we accepted the consequences. But in cases of the Underground Railroad, or for example, 1930s Germany, do you really have a moral duty of transparency? Do you really have a moral duty to admit that you have Jews hidden in your basement? I'm not sure you do. And yet, it still leaves us with this question of how do we unpack these ethics? Now, a lot of people have said that we have a duty to break rules because when you break the rules, you substitute your own judgment for a social contract, right? Everybody has their own judgment, and if we don't follow the rules, then we're saying, I'm just making it up as I go along. I don't have this accepted social ethic. And I think I have to reject that argument because it's predicated on a false belief that there is less duty of moral analysis, when you follow rules than there is when you break them, right? It is to say that if we break rules, we would have to weigh our actions against some other policy, we'd have to be able to understand our own ethics without these structures. But if we follow rules, then we have these laws and these regulations that'll tell us what's right. But the reality is that there is as much individual and moral duty of discernment when we follow rules as when we break them. If we believed otherwise, then we would have to accept that the argument that we were just following orders would be an acceptable defense in any case. So no matter what, we cannot escape from the duty of individual discernment. Jim Corbett, one of the founders of the Sanctuary Movement, wrote that an individual can and must resist injustice, but that only a community can do justice. And I think that this is the core of how we answer this question, is that when we act as individuals, it is always resistance. And resistance isn't how we build a better community. The only answer is to build communities that have robust dialogue about how to support each other in helping to uphold the covenants of love, of equality that we claim to value. And through these communities, we can help each other discern and test these leadings. I will always remember my first time in working with No More Deaths. And when I went down there, I had said that I was not willing to do medical evacuations. Daniel and Shanti, two other volunteers, had recently been arrested. This was in 2005, and they were facing criminal charges that were ultimately overturned by a judge. But as we went down, so I told myself I would help in other ways, but I wasn't comfortable participating in medical evacuations because it was legally complicated. And so then, my very first day down, we encountered a young man, 17 years of age, in life-threatening condition. And we had to ask ourselves what was the right thing to do. We knew that if you call 911, they would refer it to Border Patrol, and Border Patrol would, in theory, send their own medics, which sounds very reasonable, except that we documented again and again and again that they would not respond for many hours, whereas we were a 20-minute drive from University Medical Center. And so, if social justice and human rights is our religion, that I've always looked back on as being my confirmation. And so, since that time, I'd always sought to try to find some sort of a strict framework, a rigid framework that I could use to say, if I'm going to reject the idea that I have to always follow rules and obey rules in order to do the right thing, I need some other framework to replace this with. And I finally had to accept that other than choosing to act in love and act from love, no such framework exists. Let's play a game briefly. And this is called the trolley problem. Let's imagine that we're all taking a trolley to work. You get on a trolley and you're going down the track, and you notice, you all have heard of mad scientists? Well, there's a mad ethicist. And the mad ethicist has tied two people to the track up ahead of you. And he's disabled the brakes on the trolley, and it is going to hit and kill them both. The only thing that you can do is flip a lever to change tracks. And this lever, if you change tracks, you can see up ahead, the mad ethicist has tied one person to the tracks up ahead on that track. If you flip the lever, it kills one. If you don't, it kills two. How many people want to flip that lever? I'll flip it. Someone's getting killed either way. So then, obviously it's a stressful situation. So the next day, I don't want to take that trolley. I'm going to walk to work. And as I cross the bridge, I look down and I see that the mad ethicist has once again tied two people to the tracks. And the trolley's speeding along. And I'm walking over the bridge down up above the tracks. And I realize that the only way to save these lives is to throw somebody over the bridge and have them land throw a heavy object in front of the train, so it'll stop. Now, unfortunately, because of all the Birkham yoga we're doing and the great healthy eating from the farmer's market, you don't weigh enough to do this. You know that you won't stop the trolley because we're experts on trolleys, right? But there is a gentleman standing next to you who is heavy enough that if you were to push him over, he would stop the train. How many people want to throw him off the bridge? That's more hands than I would usually see. The reality is most of us feel that in the first scenario, we'd flip the lever. And most of us feel that in the second scenario, we're not going to push somebody else off the bridge. The question is, where's the difference? I'm not saying that there isn't one. I think there is. But what I am trying to say is that sometimes I think that we are told that we have to have some sort of a rigid, comprehensive framework to tell us what's right and what's wrong, other than just looking in our own hearts and saying, this feels right. And so the reality is, though, these frameworks are never real. They don't really hold water, because in any case, these frameworks break down when we start to get into hypotheticals. So what's left is nothing more than to love our neighbors and to look at our heart in each situation and say, what is the right thing to do? Here's a couple of hypotheticals. A man comes into an emergency room, unresponsive. He's had a terrible heart attack. His left anterior descending coronary artery is 100% occluded. His right coronary artery is 85 to 95% occluded. This means two different arteries that are both critical for his survival are plugged up. Now, we do a surgery, we place 2 stents in the left anterior descending. But the research shows it's better for him if we wait 3 weeks or so and tell him to come back later to get his right coronary artery stented. So when he comes back in 3 weeks, outpatient, what do they say? They say, do you have insurance? It's not a medical emergency anymore. We'll need $18,000 up front. Now, as a matter of mathematical certainty, this man will have another heart attack. He will. And when he does, it will be a medical emergency, and we'll stent it, if he doesn't die. And he'll probably have some permanent damage to his heart. If we did it before that, then he would not have to have another heart attack, and he could watch his grandchild grow up. And the great irony here is that, in this case, nobody is even getting rich from doing the wrong thing, right? In the end, if we wait till he has a heart attack, even if we didn't care about human rights, if we didn't care about his dignity and his right to care, even if we only cared about money, in this case, if we wait till he has a heart attack to do it, he'll have a 5-day ICU stay. If we just do the right thing now, he'll be in and out and home as quick as possible. So even from an economic standpoint, it makes sense to do the right thing. But these barriers exist. Hypothetically, However, if you showed up with chest pain, with or without electrophysiologic changes, knowing his history, knowing that that occlusion is there, he's getting it done. The question is, if he doesn't get chest pain first, who's going to let him know that he really needs to develop some chest pain within the next 2 weeks? There's a million situations like this where when we understand the structures around us, we can help people out. But the question becomes, how do we balance the ability to help people in these ways with the sense that we may be lying or sneaking? And I think that the answer has to be that we have to be able to create dialogue about what is needed to help people move forward. Forgive me. We have to be able to have the dialogue about how to move forward ethically with other people that we trust, with people who share our values. And we have to be vocal about our covenants, whatever that is. And our covenants, if we can say our community covenants to take care of people, our community covenants to treat no human being as an alien, our community covenants to uphold the worth and dignity of all people around us, then I think that has to be enough. And I think we have to be able to work together through that to figure out the details of how it happens. Because ultimately, there's a lot of work to be done. And if we, and following the rules and being tied to the rules is no less morally complex than having the courage to have a dialogue as a community and say, how do we get people care? How do we take care of our neighbors? How do we protect the worth and dignity of everybody around us? And so, that's sort of my call today is a call to move forward in courage and fierce compassion, to love one another, to take care of one another, to follow our conscience wherever it leads us, and to give ourselves permission to explore new ways to care for each other, to find creative ways to protect the people who are vulnerable. Because ultimately, to love our neighbor as ourselves is our highest duty. And underneath it all, if we love our neighbors, if we care for each other, if we act from commitment and fierce compassion, the rest of it's going to fall into place. We end with a moment of silence. Thank you.
Please rise as you're willing and able. Join in our closing hymn, Blessed Spirit of My Life, number 86. As we extinguish our chalice, please join me in reading our mission statement as a demonstration of our fellowship, our support for one another, and our commitment to the wider community. We agree to provide a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for living better lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches. Thank you to our musician, Paul Datterer, to Marika for our chalice lighting, to our greeters, Julie Tennant and Elizabeth Skinner, to all others who are helping today. And I should mention Diane, because she's been doing such a great job for the fellowship hour. And to all others who are helping today. And of course, to Jason Adner, who will now provide us with our closing words.
Let us move forward in love and courage and peace. Thank you for having me in your space. Go forth in love. Let us take care of our neighbors together. Thank you.